Thank you, John. As I said, I'm continuing with the Heart of the Buddhist Teachings. It's a book by Thich Nhat Hanh. It's transforming suffering into peace, joy, and liberation. And just what we talked about on my last talk was out of this. It was about the Four Noble Truths and basically the truth about suffering and the ways out of suffering, which is the Eightfold Path. This is chapter 4, Understanding the Buddhist Teachings. I think this is a really important chapter to understand because there's a lot of information out there. And there's a lot of sutras, and you go, wow, all this stuff, what do I pay attention to? What is important? And so he talks a lot about how after the Buddha went to had parinirvana, his teachings were disseminated among the Sangha, and at that time they didn't write anything down. Everybody just kind of did by memory, and the supposedly Ananda, the Buddha's, his cousin, he had a great memory, so he remembered the talks, and he would pass it orally down to the Sangha, or they would come to him with questions and whatnot. So this is what it's talking about, all the schools that happened afterwards, the divisions, and different people went off into different areas. So I think this is really important to understanding what the Buddhist teachings were. So this is chapter 4, Understanding the Buddhist Teachings. When we hear a Dharma talk or study a sutra, our only job is to remain open. Usually when we hear or read something new, we just compare it to our own ideas. If it is the same, we accept it and say it is correct. And if it's not, we say it is incorrect. In either case, we learn nothing. If we listen or read with an open mind and with an open heart, the rain of the Dharma will penetrate the soil of our consciousness. And when he says that, that's an important piece, because we've heard, or there's the saying of Dharma rain. Well, what is that? And what is it penetrating the soil of our consciousness? And he's talking about the Buddhist psychology of consciousness. And basically the psychology is that there's 8 parts to the consciousness, including mind consciousness and a store consciousness. And within that store consciousness is filled with all our seeds of kind of emotions: suffering, sorrow, fear, anger, seeds of happiness and hope. And so basically the Dharma rain is what we choose to feed those seeds, and what grows afterwards. So it's much like whatever we consume. If we consume fast food all our lives, we perhaps might pay with some health problems. If we eat a little more healthier, then we reap the benefits of having a little healthier body. So it's much like the same with the Dharma. While reading and listening, don't work too hard. Be like the earth. When the rain comes, the earth only has to open herself up to the rain, just like today. Allow the rain of the Dharma to come in and penetrate the seeds that are buried deep in your consciousness. A teacher cannot give you the truth. The truth is always already in you. You only need to open yourself, body, mind, and heart, so that his or her teachings will penetrate your own seeds of understanding and enlightenment if you let the words enter you. The soil and the seeds will do the rest of the work. Then the next part, he's talking about, I'm going to go through this very quickly because we can get caught up in names of schools and things like that, but this is important on what happens later. The transmission of the teachings of the Buddha can be divided into three streams: Source Buddhism, Many Schools Buddhism, and Mahayana Buddhism. Source Buddhism includes all the teachings the Buddha gave during his lifetime. 140 years after the Buddha's great passing away, the Sangha divided in two schools. Basically, the majority who wanted, referring to those who wanted changes, and the kind of the minority, which is the school of the elders, referring to those who opposed the changes advocated by the ones who wanted the changes. 100 years after that, the school of elders divided into two branches: the school that proclaims everything there is, and the school that discriminates. This is not really important why they came up with these names, but they did. And then the school that discriminates was supported by the local king, Asoka, and it flourished in the Ganges Valley, while the other school, which was the school that proclaims everything is, they went north up to Kashmir. And this is ancient Egypt, India, so that it was divided up into sections of kind of sects and clans. For 400 years during and after the Buddha's lifetime, his teachings were transmitted only orally. After that, the monks in the school that wears copper-colored robes in Sri Lanka, a derivative of the school that discriminates, began to think about writing the Buddhist discourses on palm leaves. Kind of, it's what all they had back then. But it took another 100 years for them to actually do that. So they really thought about it for a long time. And by that time, there was only one monk that had memorized the entire canon. And he was kind of very arrogant. The other monks had to persuade him to recite the discourses so they could write them down. When we hear this, we feel a little uneasy, knowing that an arrogant monk may or may not have been the best vehicle to transmit the teachings of the Buddha. So, that, save that for later. Even during the Buddha's lifetime, there were people such as the monk Arita who understood the Buddha's teachings and conveyed them incorrectly. It was also apparent that some of the monks who memorized the sutras over the centuries did not understand their deepest meanings, or, at the very least, they forgot or changed some words. As a result, some of the Buddha's teachings were distorted, even before they were written down. Before the Buddha attained full realization, for example, he tried various methods to suppress his mind, and they did not work. In one discourse, he recounted, "I thought, why don't I grit my teeth and press my tongue against my palate and use my mind to repress my mind? Then, as a wrestler might take hold of the head or the shoulders of someone weaker than he, and in order to restrain and coerce that person, he has to hold them down constantly without letting go for a moment. So I gritted my teeth and pressed my tongue against my palate and used my mind to suppress my mind. As I did this, I was bathed in sweat. Although I was not lacking in strength, although I maintained mindfulness and did not fall from mindfulness, my body and my mind were not at peace, and I was exhausted by the striving, even though the painful feelings that arose in my body were not able to overwhelm my mind." Obviously, the Buddha was telling us not to practice in this way. Yet, this passage was later inserted in some other discourses to convey exact opposite meaning. Just as a wrestler takes hold of the head and the shoulders of someone weaker than himself and restrains and coerces that person and holds him down constantly, not letting go for a moment, so a monk who meditates in order to stop all unwholesome thoughts of desire and aversion, when these thoughts continue to rise, should grit his teeth and press his tongue against the palate and do his best to use his mind to beat down and defeat his mind. See, it's the exact opposite of what the Buddha had actually written. And this is the problem that we face, is that people have changed things, added their own ideas, or thought, or distorted the ideas that were there. There are other incidents where teachings of the Buddha have been inserted in the wrong place. For instance, the teaching of the 12 links of conditioned Genesis, to be discussed, that he'll go into chapter 27, having been inserted in many sutras where they do not belong to explain the cycle of birth and death, and when in fact the sutras are about the transcendence of birth and death. They have been wrongly inserted in the discourse on the middle way. Often we need to study several discourses and compare them in order to understand which is the true teaching of the Buddha. It is like stringing precious jewels together to make a necklace. If we see each sutra in light of the overall body of teachings, we will not be attached to any one teaching. With comparative study and looking deeply into the meaning of the text, we can surmise that a solid teaching that will help our practice, and that what is probably incorrect transmission. So we can kind of figure out things that tend to repeat themselves were probably more correct. Things that seem to contradict other teachings were probably incorrect. By the time the Buddhist discourses were written down in Pali in Sri Lanka, there were 18 or 20 schools, and each had its own rendition of the Buddhist teaching. These schools did not tear the teachings of the Buddha apart, but were threads of a single garment. A number of these recensions exist today. The Pali Canon contains the recension of that originated in one of the Indian schools, and the Chinese and Tibetan canons contain recensions of a number of other schools. Sarvastivada being the most prominent. The Sarvastivada and the Tamarashtaviya recensions were written down at about the same time. The former was written down in Pali, and the latter in Sanskrit. Other schools used other Indian languages and Prakrit. The sutras that were written down in Pali in Sri Lanka were known as the Southern Transmission, also known as the Mahavajravasan tradition. The Sarvastivada text, known as the Northern Transmission, exists in Sanskrit only in fragmented form. Fortunately, they were translated into Chinese and Tibetan, and many of these translations are still available. We have to remember that the Buddha did not speak Pali, Sanskrit, or Prakrit. It is surmised he spoke a language close to Pali, and some think that this was Arahama Gadhi, and there are no record of the Buddha's words in his own language. And that's really important, because as we know, as things get translated from one language to another, things tend to get dropped, or they have difficulties with words that mean the same thing. We see the same problem with translating Japanese language into English and back. because things tend to get lost. One language is more descriptive than the other. By comparing the equivalent sutras in Pali and Chinese canons, we can see which teachings must have preceded the Buddhism's dividing of the schools. When the sutras in both canons are the same, we can conclude that what they say must have been there before the division. When the recensions are different, we can surmise that one or both might be incorrect. The northern transmission preserved some of the discourses better, and the southern transmission preserved others better. That is the advantage of having two transmissions to compare. The third stream of the Buddhist teachings, Mahayana Buddhism, arose in the 1st or 2nd century before Common. During the time of the school's Buddhism, there were some monks who started to live a life completely divorced from the rest of the society. The lay people were concerned only with making offerings and supporting the monks. That is why, at that time, there arose among Buddhist lay as well as monastic practitioners the idea of popularizing Buddhism. From this sprouted the Mahayana way of thinking. It was a movement aimed at developing the deep sources of Buddhist thought and reviving the tremendous energy of bodhicitta, which is the mind of love, and bringing Buddhism into contact with life. This was the Mahayanizing movement of Buddhism, and that, of course, is our lineage. These three streams complement one another. It was impossible for source Buddhism to remember everything the Buddha taught, so it was necessary for school Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism to renew teachings that had been forgotten or overlooked. Like all traditions, Buddhism needs to renew itself regularly in order to stay alive and grow. The Buddha always found new ways to express his awakening, and since the Buddha's lifetime, Buddhists have continued to open new Dharma doors to express and share the teachings begun in Deer Park and Sarnath. And that's really important, I think, for us, is that this is not a language of, or a religion or a philosophy of dead people. This is a tradition that is alive, and to continually be alive, it needs the interjection of life, and not just repeating words over and over. Well, this is what this sutra says. This is what but to make it alive in our own lives, to make it relevant. Please remember that a sutra or a Dharma talk is not insight in of itself. It is the means of presenting insight, using words and concepts. When you use a map to get to Paris, once you arrive, you can put the map away and enjoy being in Paris. If you spend all your time with your map, if you get caught up by the words and notions presented by the Buddha, you'll miss the reality. The Buddha said many times, "My teaching is like the finger pointing to the moon. Do not mistake the finger for the moon." And I think that's really important, that the idea of putting aside the teachings and the application in our lives. Living a better life, living a more enlightened life. In the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, it is said, if you explain the meaning of every word and phrase in the sutras, you slander the Buddhas in the 3 times, past, present, and future. But if you disregard even one word of the sutras, you risk speaking the words of Mara, which is inner hindrances to the practice, the opposite of Buddha nature. Sutras are essential guides for our practice, but we must read them carefully and use our own intelligence and the help of a teacher and a sangha to understand the true meaning and to put it into practice. After reading a sutra or any spiritual text, we should feel lighter, not heavier. Buddhist teachings are meant to awaken our true self, not merely to add our own storehouse of knowledge. And I think that's important, because it's not just the idea of collecting things. That serves no use, and I'm guilty of that very much, as far as the need. I need to read these things. I need to understand them, and I to find myself collecting this stuff, and then I have no idea what I've collected. I'm just more gibberish in my head. From time to time, the Buddha refused to answer questions posed to him. The philosopher Vatsighata asked, "Is there a self?" And the Buddha did not say anything. Vatsighata persisted, "Do you mean there is no self?" But the Buddha did not reply. Finally, Vatsighata left. Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, was puzzled. "Lord, you always teach that there is no self. Why did you not say so to Vatsighata?" And the Buddha told Ananda that he did not reply because Vatsighata was looking for a theory, not a way to remove obstacles. On another occasion, the Buddha heard a group of disciples discussing whether or not he had said such and such, and he told him, "For 45 years I have not uttered a single word." He did not want his disciples to be caught up in words by notions, even his own. When an archaeologist finds a statue that has been broken, he invites sculptors who specialize in restoration to study the art of that period and repair the statue. We must do the same. If we have an overall view of the teachings of the Buddha, when a piece is missing or has been added, we have to recognize it and repair the damage. And as I said, I thought that was really important, because when understanding that these are ancient teachings, and we don't know, we weren't there, so we have to have that open mind to the idea that not only things might have been right in what we're reading, but also things that might be wrong or distorted. And so understand that this had been filtered to thousands, millions of people, and millions of ideas added, subtracted, written down on leaves. So we have to be careful of what we're reading and really disseminate what we're being presented with. And that's why it's important with a teacher and a sangha and someone people that can support that and say, "Yeah, I had that same question, and this is what I found out." So I think that's important. It's important as we read these teachings, and it goes back to the basics. The basics of the Buddhist teachings were the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. That very first turning of the wheel of Dharma was the basis of everything. That's the roots of the Buddhist tree. And so understanding that even when they say, well, this is a sutra, this is what the Buddhist words, we don't really know if that's the Buddhist words or not. But what we can say is that that idea, that those teachings line up with these teachings, line up with these teachings. So if I'm hearing it in different angles from different people who may have written this down, we're seeing probably a correct teaching. But if we see contradictions, where do we see things where things have changed, then we should doubt that. And so, yeah, that's what I had for today. I thought that was important before we go further into this book, and that Thich Nhat Hanh obviously thought it was very important because we talk about the basis and the important part of the teachings, so we know that it can get tangled up with other stuff and other people's ideas, ancient ideas and modern ideas. Because you pick up a modern book about Buddhism, you got to say, well, are they talking about Buddhism, or are they talking about something else that's just added on to it? And I find that when I picked up a new book the other day, and it was interesting, but I'm just realizing this is somebody's ideas, and this isn't something necessarily to live our life by, but to have that discriminating mind. So with that, thank you very much. If you have questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just saying, yeah. Brian, if you have something to say, go ahead. I'm just formulating my thoughts. Um, I've been reading Joko Beck, and so near the end of this talk here, all of this puzzlement about, what are the true words and all this stuff that this book that you got and you weren't sure about. I like simple things like Joko Beck's Everyday Zen is like keeping things as simple as possible without a lot of fancy words. And I guess even within some of the traditional recognized masters, there are probably obviously a lot of different threads, but the thread that kind of appeals to me at the moment is the one with the greatest clarity and the most simplicity. And those like whichever master was asked something and he said, attention, you know. Or there was another master who always just lifted up one finger. So it seems like the less said, the better. I'll shut up for now.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's what attracted me to Zen is that the idea, of course, as I delved into it, it was rich in teachings, but uh, simple in the way it was presented, but not easy. Simple but not easy, and I think that's uh, the what I was attracted to. There's a Japanese word, wabi sabi, which um, which is applied when you see what what gets labeled as a Zen room or a Zen this or Zen that. Actually kind of comes from the tea ceremony when you go, and everything is simple but elegant. And that's what wabi sabi means is a elegant simplicity. And so I think that's what attracted me to Zen. In the teaching, it's even in the teachings, they kind of pared it down to just what was important. And we don't necessarily divide. The sutras are there, and and certainly teachers teach on sutras, but um, the main ones of our school is obviously the Heart Sutra and the Wei Nang Platform Sutra, and also the Diamond Sutra, and uh, but the other ones don't get as much attention, and I think that's for a purpose. And because I think the more you have, the more stuff that's out there, things can get muddled up with other things, and I think that's a deal. So yeah, I totally agree. Yes, Brian.
Oh, yes. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I enjoyed the talk. The first thing that caught me, took takeaway for me was the concept of Dharma ring. And I haven't heard that before, but it sounded like it's something like the Dharma ring, it's watering the seeds that are already there.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the things I appreciated about Buddhism when I first started studying it was that, would does this teaching sound true to you or not?
Yes.
So I like that. And so it's not like there's a canon or a dogma we have to believe in, but more, studying the teachings and listening to Dharma talks and, the exposure I've had, but, how does it actually relate to what's already there, kind of. I kind of like that idea. It's kind of organic almost, I think, the way the picture was that, the Dharma rain.
No, I agree. There's plenty of times, even today, but I try to be open. I try not to get too caught up in my thoughts when there's a teaching, someone, Bruce or someone else is giving a teaching, and try not to, certainly our discriminating mind says, oh, I relate to that. Oh,
Mhm.
or I don't relate to that, so we're picking and choosing. And I think what Thich Nhat Hanh was saying is just be open to the ideas that are being presented and see what sprouts up instead of, uh, you know, um, formulating ideas
Right.
before they take fruition, I guess. So yeah, I like that too. I
Yeah.
thought that was very descriptive on how the Dharma is presented, and
Mhm.
I enjoyed his interpretation.
Yeah. And I appreciate the part too. They talk you. I think one part of the reading today was that I guess Zen is a living teaching more.
Hmm.
So, and I think think that's as I'm getting a little bit older. It's kind of like the way I carry myself in the world more. And yeah, it's hard. I'm not like in the zone all the time, treating people with perfect understanding and compassion, but to at least kind of try, to move along those lines.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because it is a it should be alive. It shouldn't be just ideas or um, a book on the shelf. It's just like oh, I forget where I heard it, but it was just like um, the sutras are uh, the basis uh, of Buddhism, and everything else is just somebody else's idea. It,
Right.
like it just those are all just add-ons, and so it's to be able to apply that to our lives and make it alive for me. And that's really my quest and my practice is not just to memorize stuff, but to make it alive. What is relevant in my life, and how can I transmit that to someone else? Even like just my friends that have no idea about Buddhism, and I don't want to come off as some, I certainly don't want to come off as some woo woo guru or
Right.
I want to make it relevant to them. It's not just blah 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 blah. It's just like, oh, okay, I get that. Yes, Gene.
Huh. Um, the metaphor of the broken sculpture. Could you reiterate what the point of that was, please?
Yeah. What he was talking about there is that our teachings, realizing that the sutras, especially the sutras, which are supposedly the words of the Buddha, could be fragmented. When we look at them and we look at, we have different pieces, much like the archaeologists with the statue. We have this broken bits, and so basically he's asking the sculptors to uh, build that out of the fragments. So it's like connecting the dots. One sutra says this, one sutra says the same, and then so we can say, okay, that was probably from the same source, and the same source before there was all this division. So we can say, okay, that's most likely similar or what the Buddha had said. And I think the thing that we can, and I'll take the Four Noble Truths as the first example, because it is repeated in everything. That it is not, there's no real variation to the idea of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So we can say that we can really hang our hat and say that's the Buddhist teachings. That is something that he uh, most likely 99.9% sure that was his teaching. Then other teachings that come out of that say something that kind of contradicts what another teaching was saying. We can say, okay, well, that's a fragment that probably doesn't belong in in the canon. That is something that somebody added. So yeah, it's the idea that our teachings are imperfect. Obviously, I always say, when I did warranty work for a home builder, and I didn't really tell homeowners this, but they always wanted things perfect in their home, and there was always these imperfections, and I always joked. I said a house is made out of wood by people on drugs and alcohol. So things aren't going to be perfect, no matter how you want. All you can do is kind of patch it up and make it, okay. But there's no, you're never going to, achieve perfection in that, and we're never going to achieve total perfection in on the ideas of the sutra. There are going to be variations, and so we have to say, well, is that true? Does that seem true to ourselves? And that's what he's saying, actually asking us to be kind of detectives as we read these things and go, well, I heard this in another sutra, and so and it lines up with the idea or the basis of a thing. But if there's something else that doesn't, then we can say, maybe that's not, maybe that was just somebody's idea. It might be a good idea, or it might be something contradictory. But, it's just asking us to, be an archaeologist. As we look at these ancient teachings, these are old, the sutras, when we're talking about the sutras, they are ancient. And they're ancient teachings that were put together 100 or more years after the source passed away. So, and then even to write it down, it's just like, oh, I thought it was funny that, Saranka, they talked about it for 100 years before they actually started writing things down. I thought that was, well, maybe they were looking for a best source. And then their best source was this guy who was probably an asshole and just wanted his ego stroked. So we don't even know if we're getting something from him, but it seemed like it lined up. So they played detective too, and we're hopefully with all that, we can discriminate on what we're being told or being reading. And he's also asking us to be open to other ideas as we come across this. I hope that made sense.
Besides archaeology, it reminds me a lot of historical linguistics, where they study ancient texts to try to derive, how to say, the original word or term. You know,
Yeah.
how they came upon Indo-European and all the languages that stem from Indo-European. They did the same sort of study that you mentioned. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, because and like he said, the language of the time, they had many languages, and they had many, uh, uh, and perhaps they said, he didn't speak the exact language that was being transmitted in. So there's always that the idea that something got lost in the translation. But the idea that we shouldn't disregard the sutras, but we shouldn't say that they're absolute.
The word of God.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying.
Yes.
They weren't delivered on the mount
No. No. And
from
just,
Moses.
just like I was reading something about um, uh, the who was the guy who wrote the King James version of the Bible. He actually did a book on demons and witchcraft before the Bible, and I thought that was interesting. I said, oh, maybe he added some of those ideas. Hmm. So uh, it makes, and I think that's what makes the teachings alive too, is because we're not just taking them as gospel. We can take them and discriminate and say what's true for us. What is true for us, and I think that was, one of the Buddhist teachings too. Is it is always have great doubt and see if it's true for you before you accept what the teaching is.
Kevin,
Yes.
just a little bit of humor, right? Because I think somewhere in Zen stuff, it sounds like, have humor. Um, Mel Brooks, some movie of his, Moses on the Mount, and apparently he had 3 tablets. One fell to the ground and broke. He said, "Oh, okay. Well, we'll just go with these 10 commandments." One of the tablets had another 5.
Oh, man.
So really, there were 15 commandments.
It sounds like something that would happen. Yeah. Oops.
Yeah.
I have these 15 commandments. Crunch. Oh, only 10.
Will 10 work?
That's very true. Thank you. Well, I hope everybody.
Yeah.
I'm glad everybody was here. I know there was some confusion with the deal. Bruce will be back next week, and we'll figure this whole Zoom thing out. It's just difficult sometimes. But like I was saying, we tried to have some continuity, and Bruce send out the invites all the time if he's going to be here. But if he's not, then I have to send the invite outs because I don't have his password or any of that stuff.
Oh,
So, so it's kind of it's like it was my suggestion that he continue, even if I give a talk, he continue to send the invites out. But when he's not here, that obviously doesn't work out. So we'll figure it out. But thank you. Refuge. take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Dharma. I take refuge in Sangha. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhamman saranam gacchami. Sanghang saranam gacchami. Turiyampe Buddham saranam gacchami. Turiyampe Dhamman saranam gacchami. Turiyampe Sanghang saranam gacchami. Ariyampe Buddham saranam gacchami. Ariyampe Dhamman saranam gacchami. Ariyampe Sanghang saranam gacchami. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend. Yes, John. Okay. Thank you.
Right.